Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to share with you one of my own games from a number of years ago. There are two themes to this game. One is, why not to keep your king in the middle? That is why it's important to castle. And also another theme is about the backward pawn. Here is how the game started. d4, d5, c4, queen's gambit, declined, knight f3, and my opponent, Pia Krumling from Sweden, played c6. This is a clear indication that black hopes to play the Meran. Here the most popular and common moves are either to play e3 and right away protect the pawn on c4 with the bishop, or sacrifice it and play knight to c3. Here black may capture the pawn, which would lead to the node boom gambit, or play the normal regular developing move with knight f6. All of that has a tremendous amount of theory. Partly for that reason, to avoid all of that theory, and also, probably even more importantly, to surprise my opponent, I chose in this position to play queen c2, which is definitely an interesting move, with the idea to protect my pawn on c4. It's true that generally I do not recommend to bring the queen out early, but this is an exception, as I said, partly for psychological reasons. And also you'll see that it's not so easy to attack the queen in this particular case. Here black naturally could have played knight f6 or knight d7, those type of moves, but my opponent chose the most challenging d takes e4. The reason why this gives the most challenge to white is because it pretty much forces the queen to move again. And generally, that's not something that white would be wanting to do. However, black does not have an easy way to attack white's queen other than what my opponent played, playing b5. Now this is a tricky move. On one hand, black gains time by attacking the white queen in order to then develop the bishop. However, at the same time, black creates a long-term weakness in the c6 pawn. For now, it will be considered a backward pawn. What that means is that this pawn is on a half-open file, and therefore white has the potential to double up rooks on the c-file and put pressure on it. And the problem is that white also has a pawn on d4, controlling the potential advancement of that pawn. So black, as you can see, cannot in the near future get rid of that weakness on c6. However, that's what their goal should be. Black played bishop to b7, very natural and good move. And here, in addition to the move I played e4, but in addition to that move, knight b to d2 is very well worth considering, with the idea to then position the knight on b3 to make sure black will not have the opportunity to play c5. I played e4, came knight to d7. Now the only thing holding black back from playing c5 is to make sure they will not lose the pawn on b5. I was certainly considering in this position to play bishop e3. Again, as you can see, my focus is making sure my opponent cannot play without loss of material c6 to c5. But then black can equalize by playing a6, making sure to protect the pawn on b5 before black would push the c-pawn. And then after knight d2, rook c8, so the whole fight is around black wanting to play c5, knight b3, and now black can play actively with bishop b4 check. And that kind of confuses white because obviously the king doesn't want to move and lose the right to castle. And if either of the knight blocks, that would put the knight into a pin. And here after knight f to d2, black can still get an active game by playing c5. Let's go back to the game. After knight d7, I chose knight b to d2. Again, the ideas are the same, I'm just trying to accomplish it in a different move order. At the moment, black cannot play c5 without loss of material. The pawn on b5 would be hanging. Here, black was better off immediately playing a6, preparing, then c5. It was a bit inferior for black to play knight g to f6. And here I played a3, with the idea to prepare to play b4 and then making sure it will be a long-term hold on black playing c6 to c5. Here black's best option was to play a6, protecting the pawn, preparing to c5, and after, if white plays b4, then a5 immediately. Trying to trade those pawns. Now black is threatening to take on b4. After rook b1, trade, and immediately rook a4. If black would just play regular moves such as bishop e7 and then castle, they will suffer long term with that bishop on b7 that has no potential whatsoever. So therefore, it's extremely important for black to act quickly and to make sure that the blockade of the white pawns on b4 and d4 over the c5 square will not be there forever. Now the pawn on b4 is hanging, so white has to protect it. And now black can play bishop d6. Yes, he can, even though white seems to be able to fork by pushing the pawn ahead. But in that case, black would have a chance to escape by playing knight d5, attacking the white queen. And then the pawn would be falling off on b4. On the other hand, after a move like bishop d3, black would play queen e7, attacking the pawn. And if white protects it, then black on time would play e5 with an approximately equal position. Let's go back. After a3, black made a mistake by playing queen b6. It looks like a good move because it also protects the pawn on b5 and further prepares c5. But if we'll compare the game compared to the previous variation, we'll notice that the queen is misplaced on b6. I continued by playing b4, making sure my opponent cannot play c5, and Pia played a5, immediately attacking my blockading pawn. Have to hurry up and move my rook away from the unprotected square from the potential pin. My opponent captured, pawn captured back. And came rook to a4. Black is playing actively, putting pressure on my pawn on b4. There is only one good way to protect it, and again it's to move the queen to c3. Now it's interesting to see what would happen if black would try to play real active and make a pawn sacrifice by playing e5. It's a tricky move, and indeed, if the pawn would capture, black would get excellent counterplay after knight g4. In fact, I do not like white's position. because it's hard to defend against queen f2, and of course, no matter what, black will win the pawn back on e5. However, it's better for white to capture with a knight, knight capture, pawn capture, knight g4. Again, black has similar threats, but now that the knights are no longer on f3 and d7, white would be able to swing the queen over to the king's side by playing queen g3, not only protecting the important f2 and e5 pawns, but at the same time also attacking immediately the black knight on g4. Therefore, the immediate e5 move doesn't bring black the desired result. Black in the game played bishop d6. Again, similarly to an earlier variation, white here would not achieve anything, in fact, would make things worse by playing the fork, because knight would jump to d5 attacking the queen, and then the pawn on b4 would fall off. I continued instead, developing my bishop to d3. Now this is a tricky moment where the very natural-looking castling actually would result in an immediate loss of material. This is a very interesting tactical situation where a number of intermediate moves decide the game. Again, if white would play e5 immediately, knight d5, queen would be attacked, and then the black bishop from d6 could capture the pawn on b4. This is a moment that I suggest you try to pause the recording and try to figure out why indeed castling into the king's side with black is such a mistake that loses material. And here is the answer to that question. I planned to first move my bishop away to attack the rook. When the rook retreats, then make the fork. But didn't we say that knight d5 and black is just fine? Well, that was the case earlier when my bishop was on d3. However, now that my bishop is on c2, I can play queen d3, moving the queen away from the attack, all of a sudden threaten to checkmate on h7, while the black bishop is still hanging on d6. Let's go back again. My opponent noticed this, of course, and instead played the ambitious e5, preventing me to play e5 with the idea that after pawn takes, she can play knight g4. Well, what's happening is now that capturing the bishop would be suicidal, allowing black to checkmate in 2 moves. Check, and then knight e3. Almost a smothered mate. Let's go back to the position after knight g4, where I have simply castled. After castling, black can now capture the pawn on e5 with either knight. However, capturing with the d7 knight is probably worse than the other one. Then I planned to play h3, and black would lose material instantly. My opponent instead captured with a knight from g4, which is the better one. I played bishop c2, attacking the black rook. The black rook retreated. And now my response, very important move. When you attack, you typically want to keep as many pieces on the board as possible until the moment when you're ready to transpose your strategical advantage to material advantage. So therefore, I played knight to d4, preparing to bring my knight to f5. Nevertheless, my opponent should have castled and allow knight f5. Even though white is better here, it's still relatively the best choice that black had. Now c5, and black is definitely still in the game. Black's next move pretty much cost her the game. She played knight to g6. with the idea that if now I follow up with knight f5, which looks extremely good, attacking the bishop on d6 as well as the pawn on g7, then after bishop e5, I cannot successfully capture the pawn because after the black king moves out, for example to d8, I'll end up losing my knight. Again, let's go back. Instead, I improved my position and made sure black's bishop does not end up on e5 by playing knight f3. If right now black would castle, things would not end well because I would play knight f5, creating a checkmate threat immediately on g7 while attacking black's bishop. Black has only one move to avoid immediate tragedy, bishop e5, knight captures e5, and black's problem is that after either knight recaptures, I'll have a tempo move to unpin my f2 pawn, bishop e3, queen c7, and then f4, attacking black's knight on e5, which cannot move without allowing the checkmate with queen g7. As you can see, there is a lot of tactics going on in this game. After knight 2 to f3, my opponent responded by playing knight de5. Knight f5, immediately forking the black bishop and pawn on g7. Black must trade, check, queen takes back, and now the bishop can move to e5, protecting the pawn on g7. White's position is quite pleasant here in any rate because of black's backward pawn and the horribly positioned bishop behind it on b7. Bishop b2 would give white certainly a nice advantage as well. I chose an even more aggressive way, namely to prevent the black king from castling. Bishop e3, followed by bishop c5. Here something rather funny happened, because before I chose to play bishop e3 and c5, I was spending a bit of time trying to figure out my plans. What would they be if would my opponent now castle to the queen side? Only later I realized that that would be an illegal move, because the black rook that's on a8 right now already has moved back and forth to a4 and back. Therefore, black cannot castle to the queen side, and of course cannot castle to the king side either because of my bishop being on c5. The part that, of course, I had to pay attention to is that black now could capture the pawn on h2 and even with a check. Now, after king h1, on one hand, white is threatening to play g2 to g3 and trap the bishop on h2, and also threatening the pawn on g7. Therefore, black's most logical move is bishop e5. And now I planned simply to activate my rook by rook d1 and then threaten with knight d6 or bishop d6. If now rook d8, then the idea is to trade rooks and bring the new rook with a much better position for white. Instead of capturing the pawn on h2, my opponent chose to play bishop c8. And again, the rook needs to come to the open file. Black would have similar problems if they would capture on h2 right now. King would move out of the check, bishop retreats, and then bishop d6. Let me just show you quickly that variation. Check. Bishop retreats, protecting the pawn on g7, and then bishop d6, a very strong move, forcing the black king to give up the potential of castling, and then bishop b3, putting tremendous pressure on the f7 pawn. So what is black's problem in this game? Well, the problem is that they never got to castle. Black captured, bishop takes f5, pawn takes back, knight e7. Now finally it seems that black is ready to castle. Therefore, it's important to play ambitiously in this position. I played rook e1. All my pieces are beautifully positioned, getting ready that if black would try to castle, create immediate tactics. f6. If now pawn takes, then I can take, check, king h8 and queen f5 with an undefendable checkmate threat. Pretty nice line. Or, if in this position after castle and f6, black would capture with the bishop, then bishop e7, followed by queen e4, forking, double attack, checkmate, as well as the bishop. So, poor black again could not castle. Came rook to d8, and now bishop e7. If queen takes, the pawn on c6 would fall. Therefore, my opponent responded by trading on d1, bishop d1, and king e7. Again, it's true that the black king is in the middle of the board. However, if black would get the time to get the rook to e8 and then play king f8, black would be doing just fine. But I did not allow that and played queen g3. Using the pin, if f6, the pawn on g7 would be hanging and then the rook would fall. So black didn't have much of a choice but to play king f6. Of course, this makes things even worse, but it's the only chance trying to hang on to the material. If king f5, bishop g4, and checkmate comes within a couple of moves, g5, and queen h6, check. If king e7, queen g7 using the pin along the e file is extremely strong, attacking black's bishop as well as rook. Came king f5, and I have a nice choice of ways to win, either with g4 right away, or as I continued with bishop c2, and here Pia played for the spectators all the way to the very end until checkmate arrived. And now let's see the jewel of the week. It's a real jewel composed by Zeppler in 1932. It's an amazing example of a zigzag of a to and from study. White could almost checkmate right now on g8, but cannot because of black's bishop on b3. And the problem is, if black gets the time, they will promote their b2 pawn. White has a brilliant way to win here. First move is king c7, threatening to checkmate on a5. Black has no choice but to play d5, stop that plan. And now, let's go back, king b6. Again, threatening with checkmate, rook g8. Black plays d4, opening the diagonal of the bishop again. Then, we go back again, king c7, threatening checkmate with rook a5. Black has no choice but to put the next pawn to d5. And now, guess what? The king returns again to b6, threatening with checkmate on g8 for a change. And at this stage, black has no defense. I hope you enjoyed this elegant, beautiful puzzle at the end, and my game that I played against Pia Crumling. What's the moral of the story from my game? Make sure you castle early on, before your opponent will get an opportunity to prevent you from castling later. Also, have to be extremely careful in creating weaknesses such as backward pawn, because in the game we saw, I managed to combine the the strategical threats as of not allowing black's c-pawn to advance and remain a long-term weakness, with not allowing the black king to castle. Thank you for listening, and so long until next week.